Good evening. Let's call this meeting to order, the Champaign County Board Committee of the Whole. Um, Roll call, please.
McGuire. Mitchell. Patterson. Petrie.
Present.
Rector. Rosales.
Here.
Storr. Summers. Tinsley.
Present.
Anderson. Clemens. Clifford. Coert. Cruz. Esri.
Here.
Furtado. Goss.
Here.
Harper.
Here.
Hartke. King.
Here.
Marsh.
Here.
Weibel.
Present. We have a quorum. Seek approval of the agenda and any addenda. Moved by Mr. Rosales, second by Mr. Mitchell. We're going to pull items from Finance C7. It's on page 2, C7. The reason we're pulling that is that traditionally, this has come from Mental Health Board. They've done this every year, but this year they actually did it in the budget, so they don't have to do that. And then we're pulling item E1 under nursing home, E1. We're going to send that to a litigation committee meeting later this week, and we'll invite the chair and vice chair of finance to come to that. Any other changes or modifications? All right, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Seek approval of the minutes of January 9th, 2018. Moved by Mr. Anderson. Second by Mr. Clemens. Discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Public participation. We have about 4 people tonight. You're allowed 5 minutes each. With the first person, please turn on the microphone, and the last person, turn it off. First person is Patricia Marlowe. There's a button on the microphone there right at the bottom. If you could push that, yes.
Good evening, and thank you for giving me this opportunity. Also, I want to thank Robert King for bringing forward issues of housing discrimination, because I think it's just a tremendous problem that it's time to solve. My biggest problem with what's been going on is when we get social problems brought to this board, the knee-jerk reaction seems to be, oh, let's get a committee together and study the problem. And it gets studied, and the report is given, and that's pretty much the process. You're done. That led to, in April of 16, you got notice from the HUD office, issued a memo to you guys warning that a policy that denies housing to people with criminal conviction records might violate the act, and it could open you up to a lawsuit. But that didn't make any impression. So 10/16, the City of Champaign Human Relations Commission and the Champaign County Reentry Council recommended repeal of part of the Champaign City Code. Nothing's happened there. But this is the most important thing. You guys wanted a county racial justice task force. At least you recommended that. They did a very fine job. They gave a comprehensive report that laid out what needed to be done. And it appears that all that's going to happen is more study sessions. I hope not. I hope that you actually accept their recommendations and move forward on this, because it's time. Enough grief has been caused by this. And that's not your job. Your job is to make our lives better, not more difficult. And surely all of you, when you started to run for office, had that in mind. I hope you haven't reached the point where you're so jaded that it doesn't matter anymore. Please remember, these are people's lives you're playing with here, and move forward and do what your task force recommended you do. Thank you.
Mr. James Kilgore.
Good evening. I want to speak sort of wearing two hats. The first hat would be as a member of the Community Justice Task Force, which was formed by the county board and which presented a report to the county board in 2013. And I think I'm very happy that this county board seems to be taking a different path than what was taken with the Community Justice Task Force, where out of the 9 recommendations, only 2 were followed up on. One was the formation of the Reentry Council and the Reentry program, which has been on shaky ground. And the second one was the Racial Justice Task Force, which I'm sure you know was not exactly a quick snap of the fingers process to be formed. It was a lot of turbulence, a lot of mobilization, a lot of anger to actually make that happen. So I'm very pleased, and I want to also thank Robert King for bringing the issues that emerged from the Racial Justice Task Force to the public light and to push forward some process of action on the recommendations from the RJTF. Now, the second hat I want to speak with is as a co-director of First Followers Reentry Program. And here I'm speaking as someone who deals on a day-to-day basis in a drop-in center that we run with people coming in with felony convictions that can't find housing, people that are sleeping in their cars, people whose parents are coming in and saying, my son is in prison. He's supposed to be paroled, but he can't be paroled because he has no place to live. And if you have no place to live, you serve your parole in prison. So these are the problems that we deal with on a day-to-day basis. People not having places to live, and why don't they have places to live? The reason, a big part of the reasons that they don't have places to live are the issues that were identified in the Racial Justice Task Force. That is the city code, which Ms. Marlowe mentioned, which I know is a Champaign city code. It's not the direct responsibility of the county board. We can't expect the county board to directly act on that. There's the blockages from the housing authority, which has put in a look-back period, keeping people from getting housing until they're like 5 years off of parole. And there's the general stigma that people have when they have a felony conviction, when they go to look for housing. And so what I'm trying to present here is that the county board has a lot of political power and influence over the other bodies in this county. Even though you may not pass direct ordinances, you may not pass direct regulations on these bodies, if you do a campaign around the issues that emerge from the Racial Justice Task Force, if you take it upon yourselves to educate the public about the problems that contribute to the racial disparity in the jail population, that contribute to having people unable to come home when they've served their prison sentence because they don't have a place to live. If you take these things seriously and take it as part of your responsibility to educate the public about these injustices, then the recommendations made by the Racial Justice Task Force and the problems they're attempting to address we can at least have the beginning of some process of resolution. Otherwise, we turn the report and the efforts of the Racial Justice Task Force into another PDF that sits in a archive somewhere, and some master's student in 2035 can come and do a thesis on it. We don't need that. We need some action to deal with the incredible racial disparity in the criminal legal system and to address the concrete housing problems that people with felony convictions face in this county. Thank you.
Ms. Tammy Bausman?
Hi, thank you for saying my name right. That was nice. I'm a lifelong resident of Champaign County, and I'm a member of First Mennonite Church in Urbana, where one of our endeavors is to seek racial justice in our community, at least starting in our community. I believe it is in all of our best interests not to impede people trying to get their feet back under them after incarceration, after they've paid their price. Therefore, I am in favor of the county board making a decision to provide fair housing rights to all applicants despite prior criminal conviction. Thank you.
Mr. Randy Nelson?
I live in District 6, and I'm here this evening to commend you for establishing the Racial Justice Task Force. And I'm here to commend the task force for the excellent work that they've done. I urge this committee of the whole to take those housing recommendations to the board and for the board to act on them. Tonight, I speak from my religious convictions because for me, this is first and foremost a moral issue. Shelter, like food, is one of the most basic human needs. We would not think of denying people food, and yet we are denying people eligibility to seek shelter. That denial does not make the need go away, and it does not solve any problems. I have two friends who have spent considerable time in prison, and I know from their experiences after they're released how incredibly difficult it is to put together just enough pieces to survive. Perpetuating these discriminatory housing policies that disproportionately affect people of color just makes that process more difficult and increases the likelihood that they'll return to prison, and that doesn't benefit anyone. I urge you to take advantage of this opportunity and to do what is right and what's in your power to make Champaign County a more livable place for all of us. Thank you.
Is there any other public participation? Seeing none, we'll close that. Let's move on to communications from board members. Mr. Tinsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just give me a second here. On Friday, when someone tried to make a political controversy out of the court fines I still owed, a little over $1,000, I did not have the ability to pay the fine off. However, I had about $500 from my student loan money and planned to use it to make a partial payment towards paying the court fine. This was money that I borrowed to be used to help support my family and myself as a full-time student so I can get the education that is needed today to obtain a job paying a livable wage. However, I felt shamed by the actions of one person. Friday, when I was about to make this partial payment, I learned that the fine had been paid off in full already that day. I looked it up and found out that the fine was paid in cash. I do not know who paid it. I did not ask anyone to pay it off. Whoever did this, it was out of the kindness of their heart, and I just wanted to publicly thank this person for their generosity and kindness. My family is very appreciative of this selfless act. We live on a fixed income based on student loans, and we really could not even afford the partial payment I was planning to make. even after getting attacked falsely by someone for no other reason than malicious intent. It is very humbling to know that there's such love and generosity in this community. So to whoever that person is, you're truly a blessing, and I wanted to say thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Mr. Tinsley. I have a couple announcements. First of all, you have on your desk a photo schedule for the 22nd, the county board meeting. If you're not on that list, I know Mr. Tinsley, I don't think you're on there because you weren't sure when we signed up for that, and there's one other person may not be on it. Mr. Mitchell's guilty for that. No, you can do it at 6 o'clock, like 6 o'clock and 6:05, so be prepared to do it then, at the end, all right? And bring your best teeth. Okay, a couple of items. Jim Edgar sent out a note to me today, and I'll send this out to all of you. He's announcing the 7th class of the Edgar Fellows. It's a leadership program that's taught during the summertime. You can nominate somebody if you want to. I think you can also nominate yourself if you want to. However, it does, it's a full day thing from August 5 to August 9th. I assume that's not a weekend. So it does take some commitment of time. But I'll send that out all to you. Finally, I received this letter from Steve Thomas, who's the mayor of the village of Ludlow, and I'll read it to you. On behalf of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ludlow, I'd like to commend the Champaign County Animal Control Department for their perseverance in retrieving the dog, Patches, which was recently running at large in our village for a lengthy period of time. The board would like to thank each of the county employees who made compassionate efforts to control the dog as humanely as possible. We appreciate the professional and courteous efforts of everyone involved. Again, that's from the mayor. I think actually that was in the local news, if I recall, somewhere I saw it. So kudos to them, and I'll pass this on to them. Any other communications? All right, let's move on to Justice and Social Services. Mr. King.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the first item on the agenda is the extension of the current reentry programming grant for Champaign County. I guess I have the issue as based upon the contract that went into effect on March 1st, 2016. On March 1, 2017, the county board entered into the first renewal period of the contract for the reentry programming with Rosecrans for one-year term ending February 28, 2018. And so it looks like the recommendation for this is that the Justice and Social Services Committee of the whole recommends to the county an extension of 4 months to the current one-year extended contract between the board and Rosecrans for the reentry program with the revised contract end date of June 30th, 2018 instead of the February 28th, 2018 contract. Has been moved. And second, any discussion?
First, second.
Yes. Patsy, sorry. No problem. Yes, Patsy, and then Jim McQuires. No. Okay.
He's got a second.
He's second. Okay. All right.
Is this a no cost, is this,
Discussion? Yes, Chris.
is this a no cost? Thank you. Is this a no cost extension?
You're extending the contract from 12 months to 16 months. It's at the same rate of the original 12-month contract, and this money is budgeted in the 2018 budget as well.
Thank you, Deb. Any other questions or discussion? All right, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Thank you. All right, so the next subject we have is the Racial Justice Task Force report on housing, where we have a visitor, Ms. Esther Pratt, who's here to discuss a bit. Oh, we have another. Are you technical support? Yeah. Thank you. I was like, okay, thank you. Yes.
Sorry. Hi. I'm Esther Pat. I was a member of the Champaign County Racial Justice Task Force and worked on the section having to do with housing discrimination. And I can tell you that we there are two recommendations in the report regarding housing, and neither of them will cost you any money. Because they're primarily about, they were alluded to during public comment. One is that they're both really about asking the county board to recommend to, in one case, the Champaign City Council to remove from the Champaign Human Rights Ordinance an amendment to the ordinance that allows discrimination for a 5-year period after a person has already done their time for a conviction. And the other, there we go, and the other is to recommend to the Housing Authority of Champaign County that they change a similar provision in their eligibility policies. And we're still going here, and I'm gonna have to do more from memory. There was actually again, during a public comment, Ms. Marlowe alluded to a memo from the Department of Housing and Urban Development that was actually issued in 2016, and it was sent to all public housing authorities, urging them to examine their policies regarding conviction record, and saying that any policy that is too broad or just, I wish I had the quote in front of me, or just had was passed for a blanket general sense of fighting crime would possibly be not defensible if there were a claim of race discrimination in that policy because of the extreme disparity in representation in the jail populations and prison populations of people who are African American. And even if, and HUD said, even if racial discrimination was not intended, if the policy has a disparate impact on African American people, then that could be considered a violation of the Federal Fair Housing Act. How we doing?
I'm just waiting for it to come back up.
I got here at 6 o'clock. I just want to say this. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's acting out.
It came unplugged. I
Oh.
apologize.
Esther, why don't you just mention your background?
Oh, yeah, I am the director of the Champaign-Urbana Tenant Union. That was part of why I ended up on this housing part. And so we deal with lots of different types of housing discrimination. And actually, the effect of housing discrimination regarding arrest or conviction record is that many people don't, well, as far as for public housing, people mostly don't even apply if they have a conviction record, or any member of their household does, because they assume they're going to be turned down, and that makes it very hard to have any kind of data on how many people are being affected, other than looking at the jail population and the numbers of people who are being released every year from jail or prison. Are we close?
We're very
Okay.
close.
I should have brought the printed out version. I'm sorry. Though I do remember most of it, but it's better when you can see the words. Well, okay, one thing that you'll see actually throughout the racial justice report, yeah, actually that helps, thank you, is the one of the big driving forces behind race discrimination or the racial disparity in the criminal justice systems, particularly in regard to the jail population, is income. And the disparity of income combined with, well, the disparity of income itself is one aspect of many of the racial disparity in the jail population in a number of different areas, which I wasn't supposed to be talking about tonight. But I mean, just like, for example, bail amounts. If you have to pay $1,000 bail, most of the people in this room could get out that night because they could call someone else who does have the money, if not. And there are people who sit in jail on $500 bail, for days and days and days because they don't even know anyone who can come give them that money. And then when it gets to housing, that's what you're dealing with too. Thank you. Okay. Oops, what did I do? What happened? Where'd it go? There it is. Okay, thank you. I'm so sorry. Let's just move through here. Okay. Yeah, going back to the HUD memo, the memo just said, because people of color are arrested and incarcerated at a rate greater than their proportion of the population, criminal records based barriers to housing are likely to have a disproportionate impact on people of color. And that language, just because it's relevant to this presentation, HUD said that policies that do restrict should be based on evidence, on something real, not just by invoking generalized concern about safety. Yet the policies that we have in Champaign and at the Housing Authority were invoked were just presented as an idea of general safety without any study whatsoever to show that they were helpful for anything, and certainly we can see how they've been harmful. HUD stated, and law enforcement officials agree, and I think this has been a big change in the last decade that more people are seeing. When individuals are released from prisons or jails, their ability to access safe, secure, and affordable housing is critical to their successful reentry to society. That philosophy was well understood in Champaign and Urbana in the 1970s when both city councils passed human rights ordinances that prohibit housing discrimination on the basis of arrest or conviction record. That went on for a couple of decades without any problem that I heard about, but in the spirit, it was during the war on drugs, in the spirit of cracking down on crime, City of Champaign added to the Human Rights Ordinance in 1994, Section 17-4.5, which allows rental housing discrimination based on conviction record against anyone with a forcible felony, which is not just violence, but burglary is a forcible felony. For decades, shoplifting was prosecuted as burglary. Here in Champaign County, that's a forcible felony, or anyone with a drug-related felony until the person has lived outside of jail or prison for at least 5 years without another conviction. Where they're supposed to live for those 5 years, that's the big question. The policy has a disparate impact on African American people, both because of the race disparity in conviction rates and in incomes. I don't know if you're aware, it was actually a surprise to me when I looked it up, but 41.5% of African American people in Champaign County have incomes below the poverty level. That's almost half, compared to 17.2% of Caucasians. And that's where a policy that affects both black and white people has a disproportionate impact on the African American population. If a person with a conviction record for any crime, the worst crime you could imagine, is from a home-owning family, the family can reunite immediately upon the person's release from jail or prison because the family lets them back live with them. But it remains, and it remains unlawful in Champaign to discriminate in the sale of housing based on the applicant's conviction record. But if the person's a renter, as are most African American people in the county, 69% of families in Champaign County who are African American rent, the Champaign law allows 5 years of housing discrimination after the person's been released for jail or prison. And it's important to recognize the way this thing works is even a person sentenced to 2 years of probation for a felony could still be legally denied housing rights in Champaign for 5 years. The 5 is a totally arbitrary number. I don't even know why they particularly chose that. But if a judge and a prosecutor didn't think that the person should not be allowed into society, why shouldn't the person be able to get housing? Housing authority rules are actually even more extreme. For both the public housing and the housing choice voucher programs, every household member with any criminal conviction record must have been compliant with all parole requirements a minimum of 5 years prior to the household becoming eligible. Housing authority policy is broader than any restrictions imposed by HUD and applies to all convictions, misdemeanors, or a felony. In order to obtain or keep a subsidized housing opportunity, a family has to separate for 5 years from the member with a conviction record. And that could be the children's father, that could be an adult child of the family. How long is 5 years? If the father of a child in kindergarten is convicted and sentenced to probation, he would not be able to live with his family until the child starts middle school. In terms of impact on families, you ought to really think about that. Separating families who want to be together causes emotional and financial stress. As mentioned before, the Reentry Council over a year ago recommended to Housing Authority that it change its policy and that the City Council repeal the section of the law that eliminates fair housing protection for people with conviction records. And the City of Champaign Human Relations Commission recommended to their own City Council also that repeal, so we're waiting to see what the City Council does. In summary, in Champaign County, African Americans are arrested and convicted at a rate much greater than their proportion of the population. African Americans are more than twice as likely as Caucasians to live in poverty. Conviction-based barriers to rental housing disproportionately harm African American people. And living separated from family or living on the street increases the risk of recidivism, which further fuels the disproportionate involvement of African American people in the criminal justice system. And it snowballs that way, and that's something that we are trying to stop, or we want to see stop. So what can the county board do? It's real simple. Urge the City Council in Champaign to repeal that section of their code, urge the Housing Authority Board of Commissioners, and they're getting a new director, as you probably read in the paper, to repeal all conviction-based restrictions for eligibility unless they are required by HUD, and there's very few required by HUD. And you will then help reduce recidivism and reduce the disproportionate impact of criminal justice involvement on African American people. Thank you. Do you have questions?
Jim?
Yes, if you could just kind of educate me. One of the questions that came up was, historically, there have been public housing that basically deteriorated by the people inside the housing itself. And the thought was, could have that been a reason not to want convicted felons congregating into one place funded by public funds, when what you really want there are families raising children in an environment that's relatively safe, and trying to do their best to get out of maybe the situation they're in. But the introduction of the felons may have a negative consequence on the character and nature of the housing. Instead of being a nice neighborhood, it could become something else because these people bring attributes and skills that aren't necessarily conducive to family living. So if you could just explain.
Well, actually, first of all, there's virtually no public housing anymore in Champaign County. You may be aware of that, that the Housing Authority has gone almost completely to the voucher program. And as far as damage, physical damage in properties, whether there's public housing or not, that stuff actually with in public housing it gets resolved fairly quickly because they just repair things, and quite a bit of what people see in rundown housing is not just look at whenever you see someplace that looks crummy, what's crummy about it, and is that something that's the owner responsibility or the tenant responsibility? I mean, when people complain about torn off screen doors and things like that, it's like, well, that's actually, if someone tore it off, it's their responsibility. That is the management's responsibility. But I think overall, the presumption that a person with a conviction record is going to bring something into the community, into an apartment complex or something that that someone who doesn't have a conviction record would not bring, speaks to in favor of the position of imprisoning people for the rest of their lives. I mean, if you believe that a judge and the prosecutor agreed on a sentence, and they decided to sentence that person, and that person has now served his sentence, but society should just extend that beyond what a judge and prosecutor thought was reasonable, to me makes no sense. I mean, I obviously that wouldn't be a good policy, but also, I mean, it's really important that people are released. Every single year, people are released from prisons and jail. And so they are released. Where do you want them to live? And I think sometimes people pass these policies where they want them to live as someplace else, like move out. I think like Champaign, they think people with conviction records are just going to leave town. No, they're not going to leave town because their family's here, and that's why they stay here. It's just if people can't get legally on a lease, they're either going to be living under the radar, which is what a lot of people do, and working the tenant drives me nuts because if you have anyone living with you who's not on the lease and the landlord finds out, they can evict you for that. So it's a dangerous thing to do, regardless of who the person is. And the other thing is that a lot of people just then live on the street. And living on the street, even if you have no criminal intent, living on the street increases the likelihood that you're going to get caught up in something that's a parole violation. And then it's back to jail, and then it's back to prison. So what are we accomplishing? I mean, really, discrimination does boost recidivism. And so trying to keep people from having jobs and housing is just really trying to push them back into the criminal justice system. And that's really, and I think, and that's why the Reentry Council, as you know, the Reentry Council is not made up of a lot of, radical activists. It's mostly law enforcement officials. And they're not alone. I think, throughout the nation, more and more people, and there's been more and more studies have just come to realize that what's best for the individual and for families and for the community and for reducing the number of people who are involved in the criminal justice system would be non-discrimination. In fact, I didn't put it in the presentation, but just last August, the city of Seattle passed a human rights ordinance, or a law they added to their law, prohibiting all discrimination based on conviction record because of all the studies that show that the discrimination is increasing recidivism, and we're all supposedly trying to do is reduce it.
Any additional questions? Patsy, please.
Well, mine isn't really a question. I just want to give a little bit more backstory and say that I thank Robert for bringing housing up and you coming today, because when the Racial Justice Task Force was approved by the board and 2 Republicans and 2 Democrats worked together to choose the people on the Racial Justice Task Force. And I had seen the task force. Racial justice is one aspect, but it's a tripartite. It's the racial justice, but it's the housing that you're talking about, and it's also the factor of availability for job training. And housing wasn't getting a big focus on the Racial Justice Task Force, so I do want to thank Amy Felty and Artis James, who really worked very hard on the housing side. The vocational or apprenticeship or anything like that didn't get much play by the Racial Justice Task Force, and I hope that all 3 of these do get some good balance as we move forward and try to work through these issues that Esther just laid out for us, the task force laid out for us, the Community Justice Task Force laid out for us, and we really need to look at all those. Now I'm going to put my urban planning hat on, and really the thing that is missing in the Racial Justice Task Force report, which is too bad, is that we need to start working toward economically integrated housing, and we're very far away from doing that all the way around in both of our municipalities. Thank you.
Mr. McGuire.
Thank you. The Reentry Council she's talking about is ours. The one that you just extended in housing is one of the biggest issues that people have in recidivism. They generally move from home to home and friend to friend to try to find some place to live and stay, and they can't return to the community without that. I think there was, I don't know how many attempts to go to the Housing Authority and get the rule changed, and there's a waiting list at the Housing Authority for any housing, so let alone finding somebody to allow that to happen. And one of the thoughts was is if we could just try to let them allow someone and the family to come home or stay with their families, at least try that for a while. That would be helpful. The other issue, I was one of the people that went to the Champaign Human Rights Commission to try to change that. So I think we'd like to try. Obviously, these are other organizations. There's somebody else running the Housing Authority now to have some impact. And there are a lot of other things we'd like to do. Obviously, we have some issues with our budget, but and as you said, it doesn't take money, but the Reentry Council is going to continue to try to approach these things. We'd have to talk about what we want to try to do here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Kyle, I think you first.
Thanks for coming out tonight, Esther.
Thank you.
A very hard-working person. I once heard that you were retired for years. Sure doesn't seem like it. Anyways, so we were discussing earlier about how if an individual does not have a residence to go to when they're paroled, they have to essentially serve out their parole in the Department of Corrections. Do you know of any type of studies on the cost for the state of that?
That I don't know, but if you mean like you want to know how many people are serving their parole? And
Yeah,
then,
and what that looks like.
Actually, yeah, I don't know that. Probably Department of Corrections can. I do remember, and this is going back 10 years now, but the 2006 Chicago Tribune headline about a number of men who had done their parole in prison because they couldn't find an address to which they could be released, and then when they were being looked for, they could not be found, because they were not, they did not have legal addresses, and it was just pointing up that that problem, because even if once you live your parole in prison, you still once you get out, you're still up against this arbitrary 5-year limit in Champaign County of getting human rights protection. But I don't know the number. I'm sorry.
So earlier you were discussing that if somebody is in public housing and they have somebody who's not in the lease, like would be a situation if you have like a father who's has a felony. If they're evicted, what does that look like? Like, is there a ban from access to public housing? And for families who don't have incomes, what does it look like on the human side? Like, what is the result of that?
I want to be clear. It's not just if you have someone living with you as a conviction record, and it's not just in public housing. Though a lot of people don't realize this. Any tenant, nobody has a right to live in property owned by someone else without permission. So any tenant should not be bringing in anyone who's not on the lease, other than a child born or adopted into the family, without the landlord's permission. And any tenant could be evicted by any landlord just for having someone living there who's in violation of the lease. It comes up a lot. I don't know of many people, and actually someone just inquired at the Housing Authority, and they said there were none who've been evicted for having someone with a conviction record living with them. It's more that their name comes up on the list. They can't, I mean, most often it's dad. I don't mean to be sexist. It could be mom, but dad can't live with the family. Mom and the kids can get accepted, but dad can't. And the situations I'm aware of, dad's not living with the family. And a lot of times it's dad is the one I actually know because I see him at Daily Bread Soup Kitchen, or he's one of the people who calls attending every month looking for, is there anything cheap that isn't subsidized, because they can't get subsidized housing. So I think in general, I don't want to claim more expertise than I have, but my perception is what it looks like is not that people are getting evicted, but that people are just, that the families just are separated. And the same also applies to, your 19-year-old son, but he still lives with the family. Well, he can't live with the family if he got himself in trouble. And with Housing Authority, I mean, like I said, it could be even a misdemeanor. And then he's gonna be on the street because his presence in the household threatens housing for the children.
Thanks for coming out tonight. And I guess just like a comment. When you think about this situation, we have a recidivism rate that's over 50% in this country. And we have a situation where people get out of prison and, people don't want to give them jobs because, they're afraid. They say, oh, this guy broke the law before, he might do it again. And then they can't get into affordable housing for people who don't have jobs. And these are individuals who, due to economic reasons or influence or whatever, adopted a skill set that involves breaking the law. And when they can't do things the lawful way, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. This idea that we're afraid that these people are going to come in and break the law, and then we set up a system that gives them no other option than that. So it's the conversations that we're having in here tonight that really matter. And I just hope everybody can be open to this and kind of reflect on it. And challenge your own stigma, because we're in this situation because of stigma, the way we view people who have made mistakes for whatever reason. And really need to look in the mirror and have a heart-to-heart.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Oh, sorry, Mr. Tinsley. Oh.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the recommendations number 2 and 4.
Thank you, Mr. Tinsley. I'll read those just so folks can know. Those recommendations are that the Champaign County Board should urge the Housing Authority of Champaign County to change its policies described above, and number 2, and then recommendation 4, the Champaign County Board and local law enforcement officials should urge the Champaign City Council members to repeal Section 17.4-5 of the City Code to help reduce recidivism and racial disparities in the criminal justice system. Second by Mr. Storer. in discussion?
I would ask that we drop local law enforcement officials because we can't speak for them.
Okay.
If there's no objection to that.
No objection? All right. All right, so you've heard the motion. So what do you say? The motion to accept the motion by Mr. Tinsley. All those in favor, please say aye. Okay. Additional discussion. Sorry about that. No discussion. Okay. Once again, all those in favor, please say aye. Any opposed? Awesome. Motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so next few items are reports. Thank you, Ms. Pratt, for coming out. I just wanted to really thank you and appreciate your time. Okay, and so monthly reports that will be left on file. Animal Control, December 2017 report. The Emergency Management Agency, January 2018 report. Head Start, December 17 and January 18 report. Probation and Court Services, December 17, fourth quarter statistics report. Public Defender, December 2017 report, and the Veterans Assistance Commission, December 2017 report. So then moving on to other business, we have the Illinois Counties Association allocation of funds to a 501c3 organization in Champaign County, and I'll ask the chair to speak to that.
Yes. For some reason, the association felt that it'd be good to give out some money to the counties for charitable reasons. And so they're asking me to give them a suggestion of one or more 501c3s in Champaign County to give money to, this $9,000. I suspect every county got an allotment. I'm sure some counties got more than us. I'm not sure how they came up with $9,000. This is money that they will give directly to the organization. It does not go through the county board. So I'm looking for suggestions. If you have some, please email them to me. I will certainly consider them. I have a couple in mind, but I'm open for more.
Do they have any kind of guideline of what kind of organization?
It's the letter right there. If in case you're wondering how many 501c3s there are in Champaign County, there's over 1,000.
Okay, any other questions for the chair? All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. So moving forward, in terms of the report, I do not have a report, but I just wanted to note that at the next COW, which is the March COW, we'll continue the Racial Justice Task Force discussion, and the topic will be around the database that was proposed or suggested in the Racial Justice Task Force. We contacted Dr. Carolyn Randolph to come in and talk a little bit about collecting the data and discussing some of the data that was found in the Racial Justice Task Force report. And in terms of items to be placed on the consent agenda, I believe A and B will move forward, I believe. All right, thank you, and that's it.
Thank you, Mr. King. Next up is Finance, Ms. Furtado.
And first up, we will hear from our treasurer, and you can follow along at home. Mr. Farney's report is available on his website. Mr. Farney.
So let's start with the cash flow report. We'll start with the nursing home cash flow. Looking at the month of January, so through the end of January there. Let me just start with kind of setting the scene here. You'll see here this ending cash balance. I've got us at right around $241,000 on the end of the month. And as soon as the next payroll came out of there, that's when we hit our payroll issues. That's when we got down into the needing, the necessitating the loan to make the payroll on February the 2nd. So as you can see, as we look through the rest of the year, following the averages, that's basically what we're working off of. We've got a year of averages from 2017 to start with. You see that we start dipping down below, in March. And here, I'm going to just pull up this chart here. This is a little bit easier to see. As you see, as the year goes on, that number increases. And of course, things happen throughout the year. You'll have different times of the year where more funds will come in. You'll have some times when less come in. You'll see some spikes where numbers go up, like here in September. That's when we start finishing paying off the tax anticipation warrants. So you'll have property taxes come in. You time that along with a quarterly IGT payment, and it improves things. So as you can see, cash is going to be the story, as it has been. But that's something that we're working on. We actually had some very productive meetings today with nursing home management and with county administration and the county board chairman. And we've got some things that we're going to work on with nursing home, and some things that we can work on with the county board to try to help us get through the next several months. So they were very productive meetings that we had today. The tax anticipation warrant, of course, that was done. It was closed on January the 25th with Hickory Point Bank. We received the $1,076,760. Those funds were applied to the FICA and IMRF that was owed to the county, and it was also applied to one vendor in particular that we discussed here with the county board at one point. I'll let Ms. Michaels discuss that further. Let's look at the general fund cash flow. This ties into something that's later in your agenda. Later in your agenda, I'm asking for you to approve us to loan money from the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund to the general fund, and that is to get us through, as you see here, March and April. March and April is our time of the year where we see traditionally the general corporate fund will have its lowest balance, and in fact we project it to go negative at one point there during April. Having access to those funds from Public Safety Sales Tax Fund will allow us to get through that period of time and get to where real estate collections start coming in and disbursements start in late May. First disbursement last year was on May 23rd. We anticipate for that to be about the same this year as well. The Public Safety Fund has sufficient funds to make that loan. Today it's over $2 million. We won't take all of the $1.5 million at one point. We only take what we need to get through. So if it's only $100,000, that's all we'll borrow. We just need to have up to that $1.5 million. As you can see, as the year goes on then, as receipts continue to come in, we project that we should be good through the end of December. And to give you something to visualize, that shows you here that we have our little dip in April, and then things stabilize for the rest of the year for the general corporate fund. Now that assumes no additional loans to any outside funds. It just assumes that we're trucking along as we'd like to be. Let's look at the nursing home loans and transfers. That is unchanged from last month. The total amount of loans, debt service, that is right here, $1,271,000. So just for you to visualize, as you're looking at this dip in the general corporate fund, if those loans weren't outstanding, the general corporate fund would not be asking for money from the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund. As you all know, we did have to do the loan from real estate tax collections to the home. It's the third time that's happened in the last 3 years, and it was repaid on the 9th of February. Today, the nursing homes fund sits at just under $205,000, and we hope that they will be able to cover their payroll without any assistance. But we have plans in place if they do need some help this week. But I think they're going to be very close, if not okay, by close of business tomorrow. Can I answer any questions about any of these charts?
Could you go back to the, oh, you're already there.
Okay.
I just had a question here. Where are we on cash flow, ending cash balance as we move forward?
Which month?
I'm just moving along the continuum here.
Okay.
So by the time we get out to June, we're 340, yeah, 300.
Between 340 and 360,000 there.
It just keeps getting worse throughout the year. And how are we making up that cash shortage?
Well, you got to remember, these are just using averages of previous years. So, you know, when your entity is consistently ending up in the negative, all of their averages are going to be in the negative. In reality, something's going to change on each one of these. And so that's why, you know, if we look back here, so if we follow just averages, you're going to see things in the hole for the month of January. But during January, and remember, we take out the big lump sums that are one-time things. So that's not included in the January. This is just looking at what would be more or less considered normal revenue. They were, you know, about $23,000 in the negative. And as you can see, as the year goes on here, because we're using averages, the gap is wider. So it's really a timing issue. And actually, I had a very good discussion with the folks from SAK today. And something that they made an excellent point about is, remember, a lot of what we're getting paid right now, you know, when MPA left us, we were getting paid for things that happened under their watch. And things have stabilized under SAK. So we should see some stabilization of some of these numbers, which should improve our overall situation. MPA kind of left us at a low point. And so we do need to remember that. They pointed out to me, and I admit I had not looked at it that way. So it was a good conversation with them.
Thank you.
Okay, two questions. First one short, and that is, remind us when the next time it'll be a 3 payroll month.
Sure. There's 3 payrolls in March and in August.
Okay. All right. A more extensive question. Can you give us some idea of the things that were discussed that you see would be demonstrated as improvements? And then as things start moving along, can I request that, since this is all assumptions that are up there and averages, maybe you could start preparing for us to see if these things that you discussed today come into play, how as you move along to the end of the year, we can start getting some sense of how that will be improving the situation. Since I don't quite know what you talked about, you know, this is a shot in the dark on this request.
I think that the things that we talked about in our meetings today, that county administration will be bringing to you some ideas and things that they want implemented. They're not necessarily things that the treasurer's office is implementing. Okay, but we'll see results because of it. I was pleased that I was included in the discussions so that I can be more aware of the whole picture at the nursing home. Yeah, I think that's probably the best way to put that. Anyone else?
All right.
Thank you, Ms. Furtado. So they'll hopefully have funds available to make payroll, but how will that help vendor payments? And I'm happy to hear that you feel things are more stabilized from your discussions, and hopefully that will continue and be improved. But census seems to still roll along, at least non-bed hold census, between 132 to 135. So how does it improve vendor payments for those vendors that are months behind?
Well, I don't think the payroll issue is totally separate of the vendor issue. So, I mean, the payroll is our first priority. And so if we are, you know, this week, I should say, last week when the payroll was short, it took about, 8 days to make those funds up. You had a payroll that was the second day of the month, which makes it tough to have those funds in when your month is front-loaded with your payments coming in. So here we are on the 31st of the month having to have the funds in for and it's happened this way in previous years. So this is kind of a cycle thing. So we're not facing that this week. You know, the home gets payments in on a regular basis. It's not that all of a sudden we're going through a drought or something like that. They're getting those. So how does this affect our vendors? Well, yeah, this week vendors aren't going to be seeing a whole lot unless, let's say, you know, tomorrow they have enough to cover payroll. That's the day it's due in the treasurer's office. And maybe on Thursday, another check comes in, and that's going to open things up and allow more vendors to be paid. And then the following week, you don't have payroll, so you've got more ability to pay your vendors the following week. Every day, the auditor's office, the nursing home, county administration, sometimes they include the treasurer's office, is in discussions on what needs to be paid, what needs to be a priority, and what funds are anticipated to be coming in. And I think that's the whole key, is making sure that everyone is communicating with one another what they anticipate coming in and what they expect to be the priority. It's not fun. It is a very tense situation right now. I can't underestimate that. And a lot of the time, we don't have an answer until the day before, because it all depends on what cash shows up. It's one of these situations I don't think anybody in this room wants to be in.
Mr. Goss.
Thank you. Last month we were able to pull the magic wand and come with the 150 we needed, or the 130, whatever it ended up being. March actually falls on the second. The first payroll falls on the second of the month. When can we stop going to that well? What's the latest that we can hope to do that?
I think I'm going to let the county board chairman inform you about plans. I think it needs to be addressed by the county board going forward.
Well, we plan to have that next month.
Ms. Cruz.
I just was wondering, would you be able to email these spreadsheets? I always have a hard time reading them.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you.
Sure. A lot of times they're not ready until the day of the meeting. I hope that's okay. But yeah, absolutely. Glad to. Sure. Yeah. So I just want to make one final comment. I did have a very good conversation with SAK this afternoon. And I want you to know that, because I made some comments in the newspaper that I still stand by. There have been times that I've been disappointed with the performance of SAK. But I do believe that the home right now, when you compare it to July 1st when SAK took over, that the home is operating in a better way than it was then, that the care of the residents, which is our top priority, has improved. And I believe that we are in a better position to make the right decisions for the county moving forward on the nursing home. I think that if we were looking at this a year ago, we'd have a whole lot harder time even trying to market this home. So I want to make that clear that we're all talking, and it's a long process.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions, we do have two resolutions. Sorry, Mr. King had another question.
This is great. I don't know if it's possible to oh.
So that one there, Jim Goss did, but I can toy with it. He had asked for it as well, and
okay.
He made it much bigger than I could.
Oh, okay, if you could
But
get
I
this,
can-
this would be great.
Yeah, I can do
like
that. Certainly.
Thank you.
Yeah, Jim is my new graphics guy, so I'm going to just have to have him do that for us.
Okay. Okay. It's apparently a big printer. All right, so any other comments, questions? So moving on to resolution, on your agenda, we're still under the treasurer, number 3, a resolution authorizing the county board chair to assign a mobile home tax sales certificate of purchase, permanent parcel 14-0023-0069, and I'd invite the treasurer to comment on that.
Sure. So this is a mobile home that the taxes went unpaid on. It went through the tax sale. No one bid on it, so the county ended up purchasing it. And then after the redemption period, still no one had bid on it, so it went into the auction book. And as is the case with most of our mobile homes, no one bid on that either until this person did. And so this is nothing like the Nasty Joe situation or anything. This is someone that's purchasing an empty mobile home.
It's been moved and seconded. We have a question or comment from Mr. Patterson.
So, what's the situation that leads up to this? Like, is this a situation where it's been abandoned and they weren't paying taxes, or is just somebody fell behind on what they owed?
It's, I can't speak to this specific home, but it could be something like that.
I guess, like, just in general.
Sure. In general, it's, mobile homes are very unique on the taxes. The tax bill on a mobile home is initially a very small bill compared to general real estate tax bills. And it's a flat fee based on the age and the size, and there's a couple of different things that go into it. So generally what happens is this is a home that no one's living in, and it's just sitting there and the taxes go unpaid. That's probably 99% of the time when you'll see a mobile home. That's what it's been, is just someone has moved on and left it there, and there's not a whole lot of value to the actual physical mobile homes at that point. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Mr. King.
So is it just the purchaser takes the home with them, or does it stay on the property, or?
That's up to the park manager. So, I mean, like in this case, you know, if somebody buys this home and wants to rent a lot, the park manager's going to have a chance to earn some money on that. So I'm sure the park managers generally would like to have it either inhabited or gone.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Storr.
Does this happen very often?
Oh, yes, all the time, all the time. Now, remember, we send out about, I think about 5,000, maybe 5,500 mobile home tax bills each year. And I'd say there's less than 100 that end up going to the tax sale. Might even be less than 50, to be honest with you. So it doesn't happen very often.
Mr. Storr.
Is there been any increase in assessment or some reason why?
No, on mobile homes, it's a flat fee. Okay, so it's not like your amount would change from year to year. And sometimes when you miss the first payment on those, the fees actually are quite steep. And these are all set by state law. These are not set by the county. This is all set by state law. Quite honestly, if you're having trouble paying a lot of times the bill is as little as $125, maybe even less. If you're having a hard time coming up with the money to pay for that, and then it passes and you're into the fines and fees part of going to pay it, it'll cost you 3 times as much to pay it. It's very steep, and this is, again, all set by state law. We just follow exactly what they say. It's not a great situation. It's actually better for when you're behind on your real estate taxes, to be honest with you. The impact is much higher because it's such a small amount initially, and then the fees are, next thing you know, your bill's doubled. So A lot of times, though, with mobile homes, people have just decided to move on, and they've abandoned the home and quit paying the bills.
Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Next up, if you are following along in your multiple handouts, you will now be on the blue addendum handout that is Finance Treasurer for a resolution designating depositories for funds. So this is a resolution to expand by 2 banks, places that you could go pay your property taxes. Do I have a motion? I'm going to say, sorry, Mr. Harper. And then over here for the second, yep, Mr. Goss. Okay. Any discussion on this? Do you want to say anything about the new banks?
This is just Illinois National Bank is opening a branch in downtown Champaign, and Prairie State Bank and Trust opened their new branch out in Savoy, and they wanted to be able to collect real estate taxes, offer that as a service to customers of theirs and within the county, and so we're glad to welcome them into the group of banks that collect for us, and as more and more banks open here in the community, we're glad to do business with them. And these are all, the amount of money that we keep in each of these banks is well under the federal insurance guidelines, so so we can take them on, as many of them as we want.
Ms. Petrie?
Information question. Is there something in the federal guidelines that they only can accept the payments from persons who are doing business with that bank, or is that a bank decision?
There's, I think, 3 banks within the county that only take their own, and that's up to them.
Okay.
We prefer that they take anyone's, and
I would
we
too.
actually listed on the tax bills. There's an insert in your tax bills that lists all the different banks in the county accept payments, and it's highlighted the ones that will only accept their customers.
Okay, thank you.
Did I see another hand? Seeing no more comments, all in those in favor? Opposed? Next up, we will hear from our auditor, and again, if you are following along in your handouts, I now direct you to the goldenrod handout, where you will see a copy of that, of the nursing home report.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Have to have a little good news. Became grandma again last Friday to a little boy, so that's big stuff for us.
Congratulations.
So I took off Friday. But I did get the report done with the help of our treasurer once again to make sure we're consistent between the 2 offices here. First off, I would like for you to put on file the monthly report, which can be found at the auditor's webpage at the county's website. Would you please put that on file, the monthly report?
Yes. Yes. I don't have to move that, do I? Okay. Yes,
No, I'm
we will
just
put that on
asking that you
file.
do it. Next up, the one you all have been waiting for is the monthly report. Couple things you'll note that I believe Mr. Farney has already told you about is because of the tax anticipation warrants. We actually have a lower amount owed to the county because the FICA and the Social Security payments were made. However, there were other vendors and insurance that increased it, so it did not go out. Conversely, the amount of the tax anticipation warrants. On the front, you will see the IMRF and Social Security only holds the last payroll amount, so you can tell where that went down a little bit. Self-funded insurance went up. Those are the things I just talked about a little bit. Most of these things I try to make notes on. They are on this memo. You're certainly welcome to come and ask me at any time. You are possibly discussing one of the items that are in the over 100 group, and I will leave that for the board to discuss. Healthcare services group was settled, and that was paid with part of the tax anticipation warrants. The only other vendor that's coming close to this 100 once again is the Cisco. Most everything else kind of stayed the same. Like I said, the general decrease is $217,000. The payables went up about $280,000, but the County went down 498 due to the paying those payroll items. Anybody have any questions?
Ms. Petrie?
Yes, I have a question to better understand the advance on the tax anticipation warrants to take care of those two items. When does this start catching up with us in doing this, which is what I'm assuming we're going to have to do?
I believe that we've been doing the tax anticipation warrants for quite some time, and they have always generally been used to make our payroll obligations that the county is paying until the tax anticipation warrants become available to be used to pay those obligations back to the county. I don't know how long that will last. I think looking at Mr. Farney's projections, that would be something that you might take into consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Weibel?
I'm just a suggestion. I'm wondering if on the graph, the total amount owed to all vendors by Champaign County Initial, clearly that consists of money owed to the county and outside vendors. Could you segregate that, just like make it stacked?
To do what, sir?
Could you segregate it on that diagram?
Absolutely.
That way we can tell what portion of it is to outside vendors
Sure.
versus what portion is to the county. That way, obviously, it's skewed by the TAW payment, but that did not affect the outside vendors, but you can't see that there.
Correct, correct. And as things were stated, the outside vendors did go up a little bit. Of course, we made payroll, which was really, really important. And we'll be pretty close tomorrow for that. But I will separate that out for you.
Okay,
I think
thank you.
it's interesting to see also.
Mr. Goss?
So just so I understand this, we took some TAO funds, paid off $900,000 of IMRF and Social Security, and yet we only dropped our indebtedness by the nursing home by $500,000, round figures. So that other $400,000 just disappeared to other sources.
Yes, sir. At this point, I made a spreadsheet based on the aging vendor report, and 179, almost 180,000 was self-funded insurance. We had some health and life billings, another 65,000 general corp. There was some asset replacement fund. That was another $39,000. The workman comp was added for 13. Came up with almost $375,000 that liabilities increased based on those items. Some of those are kind of standard that happen once a year, and they all fell into this time. But that is why you will not see the obligation to the county go down as much as we paid off in the IMRF and the FICA.
Mr. Goss?
Yeah, I'm starting to get super concerned about this self-funded insurance fund that is supposed to be there in case we have collections. Now we're paying premiums out of that. I mean, $300,000 on a fund that, if you look at the fund balance on the website, it's only got about $800,000 in that fund. I mean, this is getting out of hand. That's supposed to be not for premiums. It's supposed to be for claims, not premiums. And we constantly hit this because we've got the money. Well, all it's going to take is one lawsuit, and guess what? We ain't got the money. Where are we going to get it from? We've dipped into this bucket entirely too much, my opinion. Nothing against the auditor.
No,
I'm just
I don't take it that way.
blanket
It's-
statement that we need to keep an eye on this because this is getting completely out of hand. I mean, we're going to push at some point this evening for another $123,000 out of this. All of a sudden, we're going to have 50% of the balance left that's in an accounts payable from the nursing home.
Yes, sir.
It's frightening, to be honest with you.
Right. I understand. Let's see.
Mr. McGuire?
Yes, I'll add to that our general fund is going to need a loan at the same time, so it's a perfect storm that we'll have to loan to the general fund. And so if there was a hit on that self-insurance fund, the general fund won't have the money either, because we'll be paying payrolls that cost $1 million a pop, and the money won't be there.
Yes, sir. Maybe Ms. Busey can explain a little more.
Well, I would just point out that currently the cash balance in the self-funded insurance fund is $2.8 million.
My apologies. I looked at a report that's literally minuscule, and I couldn't make it bigger. But I still become super concerned that we just keep dipping in this for premiums when we're supposed to be using it for self-funded.
Mr. King?
Ms. Busey, could you say, what was that number one more time? I didn't.
The number is $2.8 million is the current cash balance in the self-funded insurance fund. The stated fund balance for the fiscal year may even be slightly higher than that. And we do have to pay premiums out of the self-funded insurance fund because we have to have insurance to cover, we have to buy insurance to cover everything that goes above our self-funded levels. So we buy insurance and pay premiums out of that fund for that purpose.
Mr. McGuire?
But this is an enterprise fund that's supposed to be paying for its own costs?
This is not an enterprise fund. The self-funded insurance fund, the nursing home is the only enterprise fund. It's a special revenue fund.
But this insurance is for the enterprise fund, or for the enterprise operation?
All county operations are covered by the self-funded insurance fund.
And we will have an opportunity to revisit this conversation when we actually take that vote later.
And anybody is welcome to come by the office or give me a call, and we can break that down very easily, and you can see the items. I have a very open door.
Yes, sorry, Mr. March.
With the nursing home, I don't understand that we would say we're going to pay our nursing home insurance out of an enterprise fund for the whole enterprise. It doesn't make any sense. The enterprise of the nursing home is separate.
The nursing home is billed by the self-funded insurance fund for their share of premiums.
But they're not paying it. We're paying it back to them.
Well,
I mean,
they're
that's
not
easy.
paying a lot of their obligations right now, but yes.
Right. Well, I just don't want us to act like that's the right way and the way it's supposed to be done in this setting, because it is not. And yes, they're not paying a lot of their funds, but this is one more that they're not paying. And the inference seemed to be that this was the appropriate way it should be done when it's not.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
And congratulations.
Oh, thank you, ma'am.
Okay, so moving right along now, we are on the budget amendments and transfers part of the evening. And the first one is budget transfer 17-00011, Fund 076, Tort Immunity Tax, Department 075, General County, total amount $112,000. And the reason for this is a transfer from the unemployment insurance line, which is underspent due to a rate decrease, something I don't often get to say, to insurance line to cover increases in property and auto claims and required liability funding per actuarial study. Seconded by Mr. King. Comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? The next one, these two are somewhat related. You will see Budget Amendment 18-00001, Fund 076, Tort Immunity Tax, Department 075, General County, an increased appropriations of $82,000, increased revenue, none from the fund balance. Reason, an increase in insurance appropriation required based on prior fiscal year expenditures and claims to be billed in fiscal year 2018. This budget remains revenue positive, so if you take the $82,000 minus the $112,000 with the increased appropriation. Do I see a motion? Mr. Goss, I'm going to give it to Mr. Anderson. Any comments or questions? Seeing none. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Moving right along, budget transfer 17-00012, Fund 091, Animal Control, Department 247, Animal Warden Services, and 047, Animal Control Administration. Total amount, $2,978. Reason to cover computer services costs. And my understanding, this is just finishing up costs from the last fiscal year. That is correct. Do I see a motion? Mr. King, do I see a second? Sorry, Mr. Clifford. Any comments or questions? All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. Next one, budget transfer 17-00013, Fund 080, General Court, Department 03, Circuit Clerk, total amount $2,000. The reason for this, it's a transfer from remaining salary line to pay for December legal notices. So again, this is cleaning up the end of last year's expenditures. Do I see a motion? Mr. Esri, Mr. Anderson, second. Any comments or questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Next up, budget amendment 17-00066, Fund 089, County Public Health, Department 049, Board of Health, increased appropriation $62,238, increased revenue $62,238. The reason for this is an additional IDPH tobacco-free community grant funds were received in fiscal year 2017. Increased appropriation for professional services is required to pay for tobacco prevention and control grants expenses. And my understanding is this is primarily going to be going for advertisements and promotions around that. So moved. Second, Ms. Cruz. Oh, yes.
It happens to the best of us, but I'll just make note that you did skip number 5. But we're on number 6. I don't know if that's a problem if we go ahead and vote on it, because she's read it and such. So
Okay, sorry about that.
just pointing that out. Like I said, it happens to the best of us.
Sorry about that. I didn't mean to skip number 5. I will come back to number 5. Sorry about that. All right, so any comment on number 6?
I think this is already part of their budget, because I think I asked about it. It was an increase in their budget. But that I remember this over that long time.
Would you like me to speak to that?
It does say additional money, which implies that they got more money for it.
In fiscal year 2017, we did not budget to receive the increase in grant revenue because we weren't aware of it. In 2018, they did increase this budget to receive additional grant revenue. So I don't know, maybe the Board of Health also, or the CUPHD may have also received additional grant revenue, but this was specifically for the Board of Health. And then we need to increase the appropriation for professional services to pay CUPHD for the advertisements that they, expended to facilitate this grant.
Any other questions? All right, seeing none, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay, sorry about that. We're going back up to number 5, budget amendment 17-00063, Fund 610, working cash, Department 026, County Treasurer, an increased appropriations of $2,339 based on an increased revenue, none of $2,339. The reason is more interest was earned than was budgeted, which again, we don't often get to say. So I'm going to let Mr. Goss move this if he wants to, because he seems overly excited. Okay, Mr. Goss, second. Mr. King, second. Any comments or questions? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay. Sorry about that misorder. Number 7, as we've discussed, has been pulled. Number 8, Budget Amendment 18-00002, Fund 110, Workforce Development, Department 832, SNAP to Success Employment and Training. This is an increased appropriations of $86,000 based on increased revenue of $86,000. And the reason for this is the SNAP to Success program is a collaboration between Carle Health Systems and the Regional Planning Commission designed to promote self-sufficiency among SNAP participants by obtaining marketable, in-demand healthcare-related skills that result in stable long-term employment and entrepreneurship opportunities. This pilot program will provide SNAP-eligible participants with job-driven training, tools, and access to career pathways that lead to permanent, sustainable employment and ongoing advancement. Private funds secured from Carle Foundation will leverage public funds in an effort to expand workforce training and support services with a focus on in-demand entry and mid-level healthcare positions currently available in our community. And I just wanted to make a comment. Earlier, we heard Ms. Petrie talk about the tripartite stool of social justice, and that one of those important things that we don't discuss enough is job training. And so this is, in my estimation, an exciting item to have on the board, because this is addressing one of those legs in the stool that you were talking about earlier. And with that, do I have a motion? All right, Ms. Petrie, Mr. Summers, second. And comments or questions? Yes, Mr. King.
So I'm just trying to understand, is the money already there and they're just asking to move it, or is there a grant that came in, or? Yes.
Mr. Weibel?
It is money that's coming in to our RPC. They've been talking about this, and they come to agreement. And what it is basically, I think it's a 6-week-long school. The people actually get a stipend to attend it. And they're looking. Carle apparently has openings for several hundred people, positions, primarily low end, but they're starter positions. And basically, they're training so they could virtually walk into these jobs if they get through the 6 weeks. And it's very basic. First day might be how to show up on time, how to dress, and go from there. So I think it's a good program, and this is really coming from Carle, and we should certainly promote it.
And my understanding is it's at all sorts of different career paths within Carle. So lots of different parts of that enterprise, right? So jobs in different fields within Carle. Mr. Anderson.
Right now, it's 3 fields. It's house cleaning or housekeeping, culinary or the kitchen area, and then there's cleaning instruments. I forget the technical term for it, but obviously, if you're working at Carle and you're a good employee, there'll be other opportunities down the road.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Okay, all those in favor? All those opposed? All right. Next, we will hear from the county administrator, and I believe we are back to the goldenrod packet. Tammy.
So you have a copy of this presentation and also a copy of the monthly budget report in the packet that was distributed tonight. One thing I want to point out is that these are not final numbers. There are still revenues and expenditures being posted to fiscal year 2017, but these are very close to final numbers. So we'll start with revenues for the 2017 budget. The county's initial budget for 2017 for revenue was a little under $36.8 million. If you remember, that included $511,000 that the county levied to capture new growth revenue in a potential ruling in the hospital property tax exemption case. The revenue projection as of today sits at a little under $35.4 million. So when you take out that $511,000 from the beginning budget, the amount that the county expects to bring in less than budget in 2017 is about $870,000. We'll start by talking about some of the revenue streams that performed better than budget in 2017. And really the shining star was the county's 1-cent sales tax. You can see from the chart that in fiscal year 2015 and 2016, revenues were significantly lower than what the county brought in fiscal year 2017. The 1-cent sales tax spread in $249,000 more than budget, and we really don't have a good way to analyze why that is. We did not receive permission from the Illinois Department of Revenue to get reports through their reciprocal agreement in order to compare anything prior to 2017. So we have those reports now. Moving forward, if there are extreme fluctuations like that, we'll be able to look back and see what the drivers of those changes were. I will say that the 1 cent performed 18%, showed 18% growth over fiscal year 2016. Revenue stamps was another strong performer. When I looked at the Champaign County Association of Realtors, they indicated that there was a slight decrease in home sales in 2017 compared to 2016. However, it was still one of the strongest years that we've had in the past decade. Personal property replacement tax, I know that this only shows that the county brought in $60,000 more than what was in the budget, but I wanted to talk about this particularly because at the time that the county prepared the 2017 budget, we were anticipating that there would be a partial recapture for the misallocation of PPRT funds in years 2014 and 2015. We didn't learn until the middle to late 2017 that the Illinois Department of Revenue was not going to seek to recapture those funds. Another reason I wanted to talk about PPRT revenues is because we experienced extreme volatility in personal property replacement tax revenues and income tax revenues. And part of that is due to the new accounting software that the Illinois Department of Revenue was using. They have, at the time that they were making the change to the new system, they identified some misallocations between individual income tax and corporate income tax. And so you'll see that although we reflect positive growth in PPRT, when we talk about income tax, you'll see that we brought in less money than we anticipated in 2017. All of that volatility is supposed to have been corrected, so hopefully we won't experience that moving forward. Yes, Ms. Petrie.
A clarification question on your 1 cent sales tax graph. Do I assume correctly that it's going from January to December? It didn't show up on...
So this is for the fiscal year, which would reflect collections in December that the county received in March. So December, this would be for December of, starting in December of fiscal year 2015, the county would have received those revenues in March of the following year. Did I lose you?
Yeah, you do lose me because the graph is going up and down. Is this by month?
Oh yes, I'm sorry.
Okay.
I didn't realize that's what you were asking. When the collections and distributions are made, there's a gap, and I thought that's what you were referring to.
No.
Okay, some of the underperformers for revenues, one of those being income tax. I mentioned the IDOR adjustments that played into this, and one of the other large factors that caused a decline in revenues was the 10% cut that was implemented by the state legislature. You can see here that in 2017, that amount was $130,000 for Champaign County. We did receive one accelerated payment. I know we had discussion about this, that the county or the state was going to advance payments, and the county did receive one accelerated payment in the amount of $245,000. However, income tax did come in $147,000 less than budgeted in fiscal year 2017. Grants is another category where we came in under budget. There's still a possibility that we might receive one of the grants that is not included in this number. That is a grant for EMA, and I believe it was about $53,000. There is a possibility that that grant might still come in time for it to be posted to 2017. However, the Sheriff's Office has a grant that I believe is about $19,000 that we will not receive until 2018. Also, the county had a Justice and Mental Health Collaboration Program grant that we did not fully utilize, and so that was a drawdown grant. So the amount that we expended, we drew down those revenues, and so you will, I will point out early or later in this presentation that we did not, it's part of our savings and services was due to the fact that we did not fully expend this grant that was budgeted for 2017. The decline in rent was associated with the loss of rentable space due to the mold issues in the old nursing home. And then you are aware that the nursing home was unable to make its reimbursement for the debt service in 2017. That was just a little under $283,000. And fees and fines we have been talking about all throughout 2017. Fees were $354,000 less than budget. That reflects a 7% decline from revenues brought in 2016. And some of the larger fees that we're talking about that did not bring in the amount that was budgeted were court fees and court security fees, circuit clerk fees, recording fees, and also out-of-county detainee fees. So the Juvenile Detention Center had some out-of-county residents that the county was being paid for. However, they were only here for a few months in 2017. So that's one of the reasons that this number is down. Fines reflected a 15% decline from the 2016 revenues, and I know that during the 2018 budget, Mr. Snyder and I talked in more detail about this, that we feel that this is partially driven by criminal justice reform initiatives. And you can see the chart here that shows that decline since 2015. Moving to expenditures, the county's beginning budget for expenditures was $36.4 million. We expect to spend about $1 million less than that. And some of those expenditure savings are related to wages, about $258,000 due to turnover and vacancies. About $200,000 is a result of savings in health insurance, and part of that could be attributed to turnover and vacancies also. And I think part of that savings could be from the incremental increases in employee contributions for health insurance that the county has implemented. In services, some of the larger lines that showed expenditure savings in 2017 were natural gas, Also, in contingencies, we had about $178,000 that we did not tap into. The JMHCP grant that I mentioned earlier, we did not expend the money in full that was budgeted for that grant. And then also ADA projects. As you know, we deferred the downtown ADA work that was required by our settlement agreement. We were able to negotiate that with the Department of Justice, so we did not fully expend those funds that were budgeted. We will need to re-encumber some funds for the remainder of the parking lot work that needs to be done at the satellite jail. I think that number is about $9,000 that we're going to need to re-encumber in 2018 because that project wasn't complete by the end of this year, or 2017.
Ms. Petrie?
Okay, if I'm following here, the first slide on budget review, where you show the difference of $1 million and some. Then the next slide, where you show expenditures and savings, is this supposed to be an explanation of the savings difference that was shown on the first slide?
Yes, I mean, there are other fluctuations that have occurred, but I just tried to summarize what some of the larger savings were.
Okay, so they're not, when I add up the amount on the
You're not going to
second-
get
okay,
an exact amount.
That's all, thanks.
Had a question
I
about,
actually have a question. I guess I could call myself. The JMHCP grant, was that a reimbursable grant or a grant that was paid to us?
It was a drawdown grant.
Okay.
So yes, as we expended, we requested reimbursement.
Okay, so we just won't be, so yeah, that's the only question I had. Thank you. Mr. King?
I think I had a similar question, but can I tag on? Do we have to reapply in order to get access to that grant drawdown, or?
No, I mean, we completed the grant work. We just didn't, expend all of the funds that were available to do that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And so moving to the fund balance, I just want to remind everyone that this is still a projection at this point. It does look like the county is going to about break even in 2017. I want to remind you that we are going to need to re-encumber about $9,000 in 2018. But the fund balance projection at this point is $4.5 million. As a percentage of the 2017 expenditure budget, that's 12.7%. So that does exceed what the county's minimum is for its fund balance and its financial policies. Just one thing I want to also remind everyone of that $4.5 million, $307,000 is reserved fund balance, and that is to offset any potential liability in the case of an unfavorable ruling in the hospital property tax exemption case. In looking at the fund balance as a percentage of the 2018 expenditure budget, which is $36.8 million, that fund balance percentage is 12.2%.
Ms. Busey?
And just as a point of clarification, this $4.5 million fund balance does not reflect the loans to the nursing home, which would be less cash than what's reflected here. And do you happen to know what the current outstanding loans are to the nursing home?
The loans that are recorded as balance sheet transactions, $726,000.
Thank you.
So in 2018, we are going to have to consider what to do with those loans. If the decision of the county board is to forgive those loans, then they would become expenditures to the county and immediately affect this fund balance number. I'm sorry, that's all I had.
Thank you.
It's a good question.
Mr. King?
So I believe last year you were working to correct some type of discrepancy that you caught. Is that accounted for in this
Yes.
as well?
Yes, this number, again, is a projected number at this point. Once the final numbers come in, then we'll shore this up, and then we'll make sure that it does match the auditor's number for the budget.
Any other questions? If you wouldn't mind staying for the next item in case there's questions. We are now in a resolution abating certain taxes hereto levied to pay the principal of and interest on various outstanding bonds of the county. And you starting on page 32 of your packet.
I'll move that motion.
It's been moved. Do I have a second? Second. Mr. Rosales, any questions? Seeing none, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? It is passed. Next, approval of number 4, resolution for authorization of loan to the general corporate fund from the Public Safety Sales Tax Fund. And this continues a conversation that we had earlier when our treasurer was at that seat. Do I have a motion? Mr. Storr, do I have a second? Mr. Goss? Conversation? I know we had a little bit before, but does anybody have any further questions or conversation? This is something that the treasurer's been telling us might be coming now for a few months. And so now it is the day we are here. Seeing no conversation, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? And next, the number 5, approval of additional costs for fiscal year 2016 audit. Ms. Would you be willing to say a word on this one?
The fiscal year 2016 audit was the first year that the county worked with Baker Tilly as the outside auditor. And there were a number of complicating factors that occurred during the year, which caused the audit to go longer and require more effort than was originally anticipated with the initial contract. The contract allows for that in that it says that if there are changes that are required, that a negotiated increase can be considered. The delays were caused primarily through the fact that the circuit clerk implemented an entirely new financial system, which had to be integrated into the county's financial system and really took much, much longer than was originally anticipated and had far more complexity to it than was originally noted. There were also difficulties with some of the issues surrounding the nursing home. So the Baker Tilly had noted, and you have their memo in your packet as well, that caused really an additional time and allocation of work that cost $30,000, and they're requesting that we split that with them so that we would pay $15,000. The circuit clerk has agreed to pay their share, or $4,500 of that, out of the circuit clerk operations administration fund, and then the general county fund would pay the remaining $10,500. All of this would come out of the fiscal 2017 budget, and the funds are available in both of those budgets to absorb this additional cost for the audit.
Mr. Weibel.
Yeah, I move to approve the negotiated increase of $15,000 in cost to the FY 2016 audit and direct the county administrator to proceed with processing the appropriate payments out of the FY 2017 budget.
Mr. Rosales, second. Any conversation or question? Mr. Weibel.
Deb, what do you think the impact of this will be on next year's audit?
I think most of these issues have been resolved, and I don't think either the our own auditor or the external auditor, Baker Tilly, anticipate the same thing would happen again.
I would just like to commend staff for working with the auditor to come to an agreement where we're only picking up half of the cost of this. I do appreciate that. Any other comments? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Okay. Next, we are to the nursing home. As we discussed, number 1 has been taken off the agenda, so moving to number 2, recommendation for payment of nursing home insurance premium for liability property insurance for fiscal year 2018. This is the item that earlier Mr. Goss was expressing some concern over. Do I have a motion? Mr. Anderson, do I have a second? Mr. Weibel, and any conversation? Sorry, Mr. Storr.
Thank you. What is the liability, or what is the property valued for, the nursing home valued for, as far as the property insurance? I think it's on the order of $25 million.
I think that's probably right, although I don't have that information directly in front of me. So I can't say for certain.
I just wanted to make that particular point because the RFP has a minimum value about half that or less.
Did you have a question, Mr. Anderson? Oh, I couldn't. Any other questions or comments?
I'd ask for a roll call.
Mr. Marsh?
Move for a roll call.
Okay, roll call. Okay, Patsy, Ms. Petrie is second. Any other comments or questions? All right, so can we do the roll call?
McGuire? Mitchell? Patterson?
Yes.
Petrie?
Yes.
Rector? Rosales?
Yes.
Storr? Summers? Tinsley?
Yes.
Weibel? Anderson? Clemens? Clifford? Cruz? Esri?
Yes.
Goss? Harper?
No.
King?
Yes.
Marsh?
No.
Furtado?
Yes. Passes. And now we are to the point where the financial statement summaries and the detailed financial report of the nursing home. I'm not sure who's presenting on
There's
this.
not a separate report on that tonight because the nursing home will be providing a quarterly report at
Okay.
the February County Board meeting this month.
Okay, so
And
so
I
we're
think you've had financial.
okay. So there's no more action on those two items. Okay, other business. I don't have anybody else on other business. Chair's report. I don't have anything to add. So designation of items to be placed on the consent agenda. I have it as A, 3 and 4, C, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 8, and D, 3, 4, and 5. And that concludes finance.
Thank you, Ms. Furtado. Next up is policy personnel appointments, Mr. Rosales.
Okay, item 9, we have section A. We have one appointment for the Lincoln Legacy Committee. A vacancy is from the term of March 1st, 2018 through February 28th, 2021. Pius?
I move that we appoint Mr. Raymond Cunningham.
Okay, we have a first and a second by Harper. Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, motion passes. Number 2, this is a reappointment for the County Action Board. We have one vacancy from the term of December 1st through November 30th, December 1st, 2017 through November 30th, 2020. Pius.
I move that we reappoint Ms. Kim Ruckman.
Okay, could I get a second? Keen? All those in, any discussion? Okay, seeing none. All those in favor? Okay, motion passes. County Clerk. Deb, you want to speak to this consolidation of two parcels that are contiguous to converting them into one precinct?
Sure. The county clerk is requesting the board's approval to move this one parcel that is actually part of the same apartment building as another parcel so that everyone at that address is in the same voting precinct. Currently, the way the precincts are drawn, one of them is in a different precinct. So this is just to consolidate everyone in those two apartment buildings into one precinct.
Okay, moved by Esri, second by Rector. Any discussion? Oh, Patterson?
Kind of just some clarification questions. I don't know if you're, Deb, if you're able to answer this. What are we looking at exactly with the map? So I was kind of confused on how the two correlated.
The map is on your yellow
like second to last.
attachment.
There's no
It's the third sheet from the back.
Yeah, there we go.
Ezra could speak to that. 'cause
I'll
he's-
try just a little bit. I'm familiar with this property just because we did some electrical work there, but the road, you can see it's kind of faint, but the road on the right side of the picture is Prairie View Road. I don't remember the name of the complex, but you can see the MA4 over on the left. You can see how that goes and extends clear, the dark line, it extends clear over to the Prairie View Road. Those 4 buildings out of the 8 buildings of that same apartment complex are the MA4 that they're wanting to put in, that Mr. Holton is recommending we put into MA3, which would be the bottom 4 buildings of that complex. And if you read the memo, of course, they're already doing that, but technically they should be their precinct, they should be voting elsewhere, but this would just, it's kind of a technicality, it looks like, that somehow the way it got drawn. So we're fixing that technicality if we go with this plan and putting that little thumb, I guess you could say, finger of MA4, Muhammad Area 4 into Muhammad Area 3.
Okay.
All 8 buildings use the same address, and I
Yeah.
think it's our computer software glitch that doesn't allow us to actually calculate both precincts, so we have to combine them into one to make it simple.
So they've already been voting at the same place, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Okay,
there'll be
yeah.
no effect on the new changes. Correct? Any further discussion? Thank you, Esri. Okay, all those in favor? All those opposed? Okay, motion passes. County Administrator, Ms. Busey,
The report's there for your information.
are there any questions? Okay, we'll move to put that on file. And then, Pius, how would you want to do these next order of
Yeah,
business?
is
Wanna
there
do an
any
omnibus?
objection to an omnibus motion for these appointments? Seeing none, then I'd like to move the appointment of John Clifford to the Labor Management and Health Insurance Committee, the appointment of Jack Anderson to the Litigation Committee, the appointment of John Clifford as County Board Liaison to the Regional Office of Education, and the appointment of Aaron Esri as County Board Liaison to the Rural Transit Advisory Group, and the appointment of Brad Clemens as County Board Liaison to the Region 8 Human Service Transportation Plan Policy Committee.
Okay, could I get a second on that? Okay, second by McGuire. Any discussion? Pius?
You can blame Diane Mackles for all of this since she resigned.
Four, Mr. Clifford stepping in twice.
Superwoman. Okay, all those in favor? Okay, all those opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, Pius. There is no chair's report, and there are no appointments for March 31st, 2018. So We go to F, designation items to be placed on the consent agenda is A1 and 2, D1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Good.
All right, thank you, Mr. Rosales. Under other business, we have one item. Ms. Furtado, would you make the motion?
I move that we enter into closed session pursuant to 5 ILCS 120-2C6 to discuss the setting of a price for sale or lease of property owned by Champaign County. And I further move that the following individuals remain present: Bar Mann, Legal Counsel; Deb Busey, Interim County Administrator; Van Anderson, Special Projects Administrator; David Gamble, Rosenkrantz; Christopher Gleason, Rosenkrantz; Gail Rainey, Rosenkrantz; Matt Adriano, Institutional Property Advisors, Recording Secretary. Mr. King, you second it? Okay. And all in favor? Oh, we have to do a roll call. Sorry. Roll call.
McGuire. Mitchell. Patterson. Petrie.
Yes.
Rector. Rosales. Store. Summers. What? Tinsley.
Yes.
Weibel. Anderson. Clemens. Clifford. Cruz. Esri.
Yes.
Goss. Harper.
Yes.
King.
Yes.
Marsh.
Yes.
Furtado.
Yes. It's approved. So we are now going into closed session.